welcome back to the channel, Soapsters. So in today's tutorial we're looking at a slightly more chic design, and it's using a kind of layer technique, but rather than having very straight layers, we're actually going to texture these layers so you get a bit more movement in it. It's a little bit more interesting. So I've split my oils down into three separate batters, and in the first and the third I'm using this kind of blue-green colour here, and that's from Mineral Makeup Ingredients, and it's just called blue-green, and it makes this wonderful kind of turquoise, almost kind of Tiffany colour. The technique that I always use for ensuring that I get a pretty consistent colour is by splitting off as much of the oil that I need for that particular colour for both of the layers, and then colouring it all together, and then splitting that into the required number of amounts I need. And that way I can always ensure that I've got a pretty good colour match, and it saves trying to then rematch a colour that you've maybe added a little bit more mica into, or if you've got to do it for a UK assessment, you know exactly that you're going to get exactly the same colour every single time with the right amount of mica, and therefore you're not having to think, oh, it's going to look different now, or any of those things. So really nice tip there. And I'm just going to bring this up to trace. I'm actually going to bring this up to a relatively decent trace because I need this to thicken up quite quickly. And this is one of those techniques that really works if your fragrance oil happens to speed up trace a little bit. Now, you don't want anything that's going to go absolutely crazy and give you basically soap on a spatula, but you can use a fragrance oil that will speed up trace a little bit, and therefore you'll be able to work this design a little bit easier and a little bit quicker. So you can always bear that in mind should you need to use up some of those fragrance oils you think are a little bit naughty. Now, what I've done is I've actually split my batter down into three separate sections. So there'll be this colour on the bottom and the top, and then we're going to have a white marble section in the centre. So I'm pouring in my first layer here, and it's been stick blended until it is actually reasonably thick. It's actually coming right up to trace now. And you'll see here, as I kind of just play with it, you'll see it's actually going to be properly at trace. So you can see in the bottom there, I've left a little bit of batter because I want to use that to colour the green section in the marble. And all I'm doing is going through this layer here, and I'm just giving it some texture, some up and down, just giving it some motion through it with my spatula. Now, you can use a spoon or you can use various things to make this texture. What I'm just trying to do is get some up and down motion within that layer, so you get these beautiful kind of ridges and troughs within it. Now that I've got that sorted, we're actually going to do mica lines within the two layers. So we're going to have a mica line between this layer and the next one, and then a mica line between that layer and the one after it. Now, when I say mica line, what I actually should say is cocoa line. This here is cocoa powder, and by using cocoa powder rather than mica, it gives you a stronger bond between the two layers of soap. You're trying to get that mica line between, and it also allows you to get a thicker mica line between the two. You can, of course, use mica, but you do have to be a little bit careful with keeping it nice and thin. And some people do like that very fine line of mica. And if you're going to use mica, you should use a very deep contrast between the layers so you can absolutely see it, but there's no guarantee it's going to come through as strongly as you wish. By using cocoa powder, you're going to get a far better, nicer joint, and you'll be able to see that mica line absolutely beautifully. Now, I made a mistake here, and see if you can spot it. Notice the top of the soap is quite dry and you can see the cocoa sitting there. Now, ideally, to avoid that coming up into the next layer, you want to dampen that down with a little bit of distilled water, just in a little spray bottle. So I should really have sprayed this with a little bit of distilled water, and you'll see in a little bit on the next layer where I do that. But on this one, I didn't manage that quite so nicely. Now, in order to do our marble middle layer, what I'm doing here is I've just made up a little bit of extra batter using some of the blue that I already had. I've added a little bit of extra mica in there, made up a little bit of batter from the white section that I've got here, and then I've just drizzled that in, and I'm going to give it a very quick stir, and then I'm going to get this poured in. Now, what you'll notice here is that bit of dry that's on the top there is going to float up into the rest of the batter. Now, I don't mind that too much. It's a good thing to have in there. It's got a slight exfoliation to it. It's not a problem, but if you want to avoid that, that's where I said that little bit of kind of spray of distilled water is going to be your friend at this point. So moving on, what we're going to do now is we're just going to texture this layer like we did with the other one, but this time I'm going to be actually using a little palette knife to get some kind of deep rucks and roughness in there as well. And we're just going to really kind of give this some texture. I should have waited a little bit longer for this to set up a little bit more, so those kind of peaks and troughs were going to be a lot more, but I was running out of time here and I wanted to get this done. So I've zoomed in a little bit here for you so you can see how thick a layer of that cocoa I've got in. Now here is where I'm spraying that distilled water onto the cocoa just to dampen it all down, which is going to keep it in place and mean that when I pour this final layer on in a second, you can see that none of that is going to raise up to the top. The edge is just a little wipe here, so we're not getting any of that kind of mucky, dirty water into that top layer. Give that a good wipe down. And then all we're going to do is pour this relatively fluid final layer into the mould and just let that trickle into all of those areas. That extra bit of water is really going to get taken care of during saponification. But you can see there that it just means that last little bit of cocoa powder is not going to basically be a problem, as it's not going to float up into that final layer and you're going to get a beautiful final layer of soap. We're onto the cut now. So this was a relatively easy cut. We're just going to take the little kind of sliver of an end off here to neaten everything up. And this was a little bit of a new recipe for me. I've introduced a little bit more cocoa butter back into my recipe because I've actually been able to source some and get some back into it. And I like the feeling of cocoa butter on the skin. So I've added that back into my recipe. And now we're just going to take some cuts of this. So I'll set it to some music and I'll see you at the end. There we have the finished soap. As you can see, it's got a really nice chic look to it. And with that really thick cocoa mica line, it really stands out in this soap. And I think it's a really wonderful way of getting that fantastic kind of chic look to a soap. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. It really helps me grow and it allows me to make more videos and tutorials for all of you. When you subscribe, don't forget to click the little bell icon if you'd like to be notified when a new video is uploaded. Thanks a lot, Soapsters, and I'll see you again next time.